Hey, what's up? Time for a recap, I guess, because I haven't done any videos this week. I've done a little reading, finished a couple things. I'm still in the middle of the collected boxing stories of Robert Howard. These are great. These are mostly Sailor Steve Costigan stories, almost all of them except two at the end, I think. By coincidence, though, let me see if I can find it. I uh, I also read the most recent couple issues of Savage Sword of Conan, the New Titan Books edition of that, and this most recent one, number 10. Looking for the cover here, happens to have an adaptation of one of the boxing stories. Here it is. Here's the cover. It's Savage Sword of Conan Comics, number 10. That is, I think, the first cover in this current iteration that is a non-Conan cover. That is, in fact, Sailor Steve Costigan and his little bulldog, Mike the Bulldog, who accompanies him on most of his adventures. I talked about these stories before. I really do enjoy them. They're fun. They're raucous. They're humorous. And it's just a nice coincidence to see that cover by one of my favorite comic artists, Mike Mignola, who created Hellboy, and that's his cover. He didn't do the art on the interior of the story. Let me see if I can find that, because that was pretty interesting too. It's an adaptation of one of the stories. I'm not really sure which one. It might be an amalgamation of a couple. It's just coming up here now, I think. Oh my goodness, lost my place again. I read these on Hoopla. Here's somebody's rendition of the boxer. Can't see without my glasses. That's a Gerardo Zaffino interpretation of Sailor Steve and Bulldog Mike. But the actual story, written by Jim Zub, as are all the three stories in this particular issue of Savage Sword, that is Snakeskin Shuffle, uh, illustrated by Rob Delator, something like that. I guess that's Steve here getting pounded by a big brute there. Um, who's so confident of beating this guy's ass and not getting having a glove laid on him that he's wearing glasses during the fight. Anyway, set in Singapore in 1930. Uh, there's a nice little Easter egg here. It says these are first person narrated stories in the original and also in this comic adaptation here. Um, it's not going to be, it's going to be too blurry probably. But he introduces himself. He says, "My name's Sailor Steve Costigan, not to be confused any with soldier Stephen Costigan, my courageous cousin who fought in the trenches in the Big World War." That's kind of an Easter egg because that's a little inside joke referring to another character, referring to the story, the main character in the story, Skullface, who happens to also be named Stephen Costigan, not related, not linked together by Howard in any form, but they're just doing that for a little fun little reference in there. In this story, I read, as I said, I read Skullface last month. It was really not one of my favorite Howard stories, unlike these Costigan stories. Another thing I really like, and it really shows up well in the splash page, is it seems to me Rob de la Torre is highly influenced, at least in the story, by my one of my favorite comic artists of all time, Joe Kubert. See if I can find another one here. Here's a good panel there. So it'll come into focus. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Anyway, I recommend that. That was nice to run across. And I just happened to be looking on Hoopla for new comics and saw that issue was out with this character that I've been reading. Got about halfway through it. The stories are very consistently good, but I talked about it before, so I'll just quickly go over what else I was reading. I read. I've started Villette finally. It's really good, but I'm not going to. It's a long book. I'm not going to finish by the end of the month. So Victober for me ended up being just one book, which I probably won't finish till November. What else? I'm a little. I've got a stand going here. I've got the microphone, which I'm really not that used to yet, so I feel a bit awkward. Uh, Also, not having done very many videos lately, I'm just kind of out of practice. This is a copy of the pulp Fight Stories, which has a rare Robert Howard cover story for a story called Circus Fests. Haven't read that one. I just pulled a few of these off. Here's Jack Dempsey's Fight magazine, which in the small print credits Howard as having a story in that issue. Oh, and here's the Iron Man, a well-known Howard novella. It was also in Fight Stories. The reason I show these is just to show that the fight genre was an actual pulp genre big enough to support several magazines of fiction. Of course, this one is fact and fiction, so it probably had profiles of fighters and things like that, but also some stories. Which I mean, it wasn't as big as westerns, but it was probably a bigger subgenre than fantasy, which really only had two major magazines: Weird Tales and Unknown. Um, it's kind of gone by the wayside, but it was really a thriving little subgenre that of chock full of entertaining fiction. So, what else did I read this month? Not too much. I did watch a couple movies. I'll show those first. I watched this. The Bowery Boys Meet the Monsters. You can get this on YouTube, no charge. It's kind of fun. It has one of my favorite character actor villains from TV of the 50s and 60s. John Diener plays the villain in this. Look him up. Anyway, it's the Bowery Boys. At this point in 1954, they're down to just Leo, Gorcey, and Hans Hall as the main characters. They go to some crazy house full of weirdos. One of whom is trying to transplant. Is wants to cut off Leo Gorcey's head and put it on the robot. The other wants to take Hans Hall's brain out and put it into his gorilla. They have all kind of crazy schemes. It's okay. It's funny, not as funny as Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein. But speaking of Frankenstein, I also watched this. Maybe my favorite Peter Cushing character is Frankenstein. This is the first of the Hammer Frankenstein movies. It holds up really well. I've watched it a few times. Those are always fun. And then on to my reading that I actually finished this week. This one I had to get in, and so I didn't even read this either. Come to think of it, I had to get this an audiobook because I waited for it from the library, and I belonged to two libraries, and neither one of them bought the print book, but one of them did have this audiobook. Andrew Lownie, entitled "The Rise and Fall of the House of York." This is the king's brother. Always block his name, even though I just finished the book. That's Fergie. His wife or his ex-wife. They divorced long ago, yet they seem to be intimately connected all through their life. It's mostly a list of all the schemes they pulled, uh, uh, which are a lot of schemes. They traded on their titles and their family connections, make a lot of money over the years. And it's an interesting book. I mean, he's the Duke's, or I guess he's ex-Duke now, because he's in it, happens to be in the news again this week because the the memoir of one of his victims who committed suicide last year is coming out posthumously. So they've all had, and there's a lot about that in here. I guess I became interested in the royal family when, after watching The Crown, that series, The Crown. They are pretty fascinating people. It is a very odd situation in the world, I think. Very fascinating to read about. They have a strange uh, place in contemporary life. I mean, there's a lot of other countries that have kings, but in fact, I'm in Spain right now. They have a king. You never hear about it. It's not a big issue. A lot of European countries have these like vestigial monarchies, but nothing like the royal family of England. So they're very interesting to read about. And of course, it goes into the Epstein stuff too. He's a very despicable person on every level, but it was interesting to read about. It became a little too much at one point because they pull so many grifts and scams and trade on, and all the and skim off all these charities they're supposed to be running, and you know do ridiculous, extravagant things like taking a 15-minute helicopter ride to a golf course instead of and billing it to the government rather than a 35-minute train ride or whatever. Just insane stuff like that. Very entitled, horrible people. She's not quite as bad as him because she's not a sexual predator, but it's an interesting book if you're into that kind of thing. He's getting his comeuppance now, so that's really all you can ask for, I guess. But I did enjoy reading it, although it is kind of relentless because there are so many. It's almost an economic autobiography because they list scam after scam after scam that these guys pulled, both together and separately. And they're weirdly, even though they've been divorced for many years, they still sort of live together platonically, and strange pair, strange pair. On the other side, the exact other side of life, I also read a novel, but a very autobiographical novel by Solzhenitsyn. This is his first published work, I believe. One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, about life in a Soviet labor camp. One day in the life, as it says. It's very, very well written. I want to read more Solzhenitsyn. I do want to read the Gulag Archipelago, which is his big memoir of his time in prison camps. He was a captain or a major, I forget, in a Soviet artillery unit in World War II. Then some letters came out speaking about against the Soviet leadership, his own leadership at the time. So he got arrested and thrown into a labor camp at the end of the war. And near the end of the war, stayed there for, I think, 6 years. Then he wrote this novel about life in a work camp, an enforced labor camp, a very gripping novel. It was published not long after the death of Stalin, when there was kind of I think it was called the thaw, or anyway, there was a temporary under the early era of Khrushchev. Things opened up a little bit. It was printed in a literary journal in the Soviet Union, and then a couple of his other early books were too. But eventually, he was the thaw unthawed, and his books were only published abroad and in foreign translations, and then smuggled back into the Soviet Union. So, I'd like to read more by him. This is very. He did a good choice to make it what he termed a better than average day in the camp. It was like a day that went pretty well, which kind of highlights up how horrible their lives were. Freezing cold and starving and being forced to work, and the politics and social dynamics or whatever of being in a forced labor camp full of political prisoners. So it's very powerful work. It's very quick, reads very quick. It just so happens that both those books I just mentioned, I got as recommendations from Mark at Book Time with Elvis. One he had done as a straight review. That was the entitled the Royals book, and so I keep forgetting the name of that prince, the brother of King. I get all their names mixed up, so I don't want to say their names. I know that, because I'll say Philip and oh no, that was the dad, and that was Prince Philip, the dad of the current king, who's King Charles III, and then the son is William, and the other son is. So what is the brother's name? Is it Edward? I don't want to say it because I get them all mixed up because they all have interchangeable names. It sounds to me. And then he, as part of Mark's 30 or 31 days of reading shorties in September, he mentioned the Solzhenitsyn book. So I have him to thank for both of those. What else? Did I read anything else? Did I finish anything else? I'm in the middle of another audiobook. Maybe I'll talk about that next time. I'm going to be on, going to be live in a couple days with, I guess that's all I've finished, with Alan and Greg. Alan of and Greg gonna be have me on their live show on Monday. I'll put a link up about that soon. Because I don't know whose channel it is actually on, which of their channels it is on. But maybe you can catch me on that. And I'll talk to you later.